We are back, and in this week's video I'm going to show you guys how to make plates. Now these plates were not made by me, they were actually bought from a store, but you can basically make your own, and you can have a foot on it if you want, or it could be subtle, or you can have no foot. You can have it straight walled, or you can have it flared out, or you can have the more contemporary style where it's a normal looking plate. And so in this video I'm going to show you guys how to do it in 3 different ways, starting off with beginner, and moving on to intermediate, and finally the advanced. Alright, let's go ahead and get started. So in the beginner method, you'll need a few things to help you assist the creation of the plate. That is a wooden knife, a needle, of course your trusty sponge, and a new tool, which would be a rolling pin. You could use a PVC pipe, basically anything that's cylindrical and smooth in nature. Because for this first plate, we're going to be compressing the clay down using that cylindrical object. So we're going to take these things and put on the side, and we are going to be using about 2 pounds. So we have a 2-pound ball of clay, and we're going to go ahead and get this centered and start developing the plate shape. So this is the first method, the easiest, and it is the most beginner friendly. And prepping the clay, always the same. Roll it, attach it, and push down. Alright, and then water and seal your edge. And then in some videos, you may have seen people make plates by just compressing this down already from the very beginning. And my recommendation is you should try to at least center a little bit by compressing the clay down with your hands and then coning up and down a few times. And the reason for that, this helps realign your clay particles, and it can potentially help your piece from warping or cracking in the drying process. So now it doesn't need to be 100% centered, so that's why this is beginner friendly. So I'm going to go ahead and leave it a little off center for those who may struggle with getting centered. And we're going to go ahead and start compressing this down. Now in order to compress it, that is where the rolling pin comes in. So normally you want to clean your hands. Let's go ahead and get the clay off our hands so the rolling pin's not slippery, and we'll go ahead and start compressing this down. All right, with clean, more or less dry hands, I can go ahead and grab your cylindrical device, whether that's a rolling pin or whatever you choose. And the first thing you want to do is coat the surface of the cylinder with water. You don't want this to get dry or it's going to get stuck to your clay. And when you pop this off, it may remove some clay as well. And when we compress down, I don't recommend holding it by the roller so it rolls. I recommend holding it by the actual cylinder so you can compress down and really lean your body weight into the piece to compress. So we're going to spin the wheel, add a little bit of water. And we're going to go ahead and I'm anchoring my hands to the splash pan and then leaning in. More likely you'd be anchoring your hands to the knees of your body. Okay, so right there I'm going to pull the tool off. It's completely dry, so I'm going to want to add more water. And you want the clay nice and slick throughout the process, because like I said, if the clay gets dry and you pop this off, it may remove some of the clay. So we're going to go ahead and keep compressing, and you're going to notice this edge is going to start mushrooming out and become flared out and not attached. And that's totally fine for this beginner technique. So right there you can start seeing it mushroom out. And the reason why that's okay for the beginner technique is once you compress this all the way down, all this clay is just going to reattach to the bottom. So if you're worried about it not attaching well, you could take away a little bit of the water so it's not as slick, and just keep repeating. And talking about thickness, so when you make a plate, normally you should trim a foot. A foot helps prevent the clay from warping. And so if you want to trim a foot, you want to compress this clay to about 1/2 inch thick, so that's about that much, to 3/4. So you trim the foot. Now if you don't want a foot, you can compress it as thin as 1/4 inch, but the thinner you make this plate at the base, the more likely it will warp and or lift up during the drying process. So this specific one, I'm going to keep a little thicker because we can always thin it out later. So I'm going to go and get about 1/2 inch. So right now you can see this edge is starting to almost touch the bat. And so this next compression, we're going to push down nice and even, and it should start laying out onto the bat. Okay, so it's looking pretty good. So I'm taking my time, adding water as needed. And right now this is about 3/4. I'm going to go into 1/2 inch. You can hear that kind of water, kind of flushing noise, that noise, and that's from the clay securing to the bat and pushing all those water particles out. Okay, so right here I'm going to check for the clay thickness before I start the next process. So right there we have a little more than 1/2 inch, so I'm going to go a little thinner, just a tad bit, and then we're going to go ahead and start forming this into the plate. Okay, so this part, as you get flatter and flatter, it's really important you apply even pressure because you don't want this piece to get bumpy and unlevel. Okay, right there looks pretty good. And the edge right here, this is slightly off, so we're going to go ahead and cut that off with a needle. But the first thing that I recommend is after you compress this down, we use the rolling pin to push. I do recommend going back either with your fingers, with a sponge, or with a rib to really compress this to help prevent the middle from two things: lifting up when it dries, and number two, cracking when it dries. So normally when you throw a plate, sometimes you may notice an S-crack form in the middle, and that's because it wasn't compressed enough. So when I do this, I like using the sponge for the initial press. I'm pushing down just a tad bit, and then I'm moving my hands outwards from the center. So this helps realign all the clay particles. If you have any high spots, this helps remove it. And it does thin the clay out a little bit more. So if you are going to do this, just make sure that you keep your base a little on the thicker side. If you want to see more ceramic videos, don't forget to like and subscribe. That way it helps grow the channel and you'll be able to see these videos as they're released every week. So now my clay is about a little thinner than 1/2 inch. It's about 3/8. I'm actually going to show you guys how to attach a foot to this during the trimming process in the next video. So I'm going to keep it footless for now. If you wanted a foot, like I said, you could keep it a little thicker, 1/2 inch to 3/4, and you trim all that away. So the reason why I want to attach a foot is that's going to allow me to make a bigger plate because it's flatter and this clay is more distributed outwards. And by attaching a foot, I'm not shaving away all that excess clay. And that's the one thing I'm not a fan about throwing plates. Normally, half the amount of clay goes to the bottom, and you're going to have to trim that away. So if you can attach a foot, you can throw bigger pieces with less amounts of clay. More work in the post-process during the trimming, but overall, I find it pretty awesome to attach a foot. All right, anyway, going back to the plate. Now that I've compressed the middle, I added a very light spiral. I can get rid of that later if I want. We want to cut off this extra clay on the outside so we have a perfect circle. So that's where the needle comes in, and we're going to be dropping the needle at 3 o'clock downwards so that the point is facing directly away from our body, not towards the middle, but directly away, so that we basically are cutting off the extra. So if you watch the trimming video, this is basically how you mark your foot. Now when you drop it, it's like a record player needle dropping on the record. You want to drop it and then slowly push down. And you want to drop it at a point where you maximize your clay. So if you wanted to measure and get a specific size, that would be the time to bring in a ruler, measure and mark. But this one, I'm just going to go ahead and try to maximize the plate size. So right there looks good. And that looks like a nice straight circle. So I'll just continue pushing until I hit the bat. Now, if you started pushing, and let's say your line looked like that, most likely your hand moved a little bit side to side. So just erase that and try again. But anyway, I'm going to use this line, and I'm just going to slowly push down until I hit the bat. Right there, that sound is the plastic scraping against the metal. And then I'm going to take my needle, slide it underneath that ring I just made. So I'm going to slow it down actually. And then I'm going to slice and then peel. So now I have a perfectly flat disc, perfectly round disc, and now it's ready to start the next process. So before I start the next process, I do like rounding and compressing the clay on the outside, and that just helps realign the clay, especially if it looked rough. This helps clean it up. And now we basically have to get this edge off the bat so we can have a wall to work with to flare it out. Now there's two ways to do this. The first way, you may have seen in other videos, you take an object, usually a cutting tool, in this case a wooden knife, you apply downwards pressure and you push it into the bottom to cut underneath it, and then you pry up, and you get your finger and start lifting. Now, that method works, but I'm not the biggest fan of it, but I'll show you how to do it, and I'll show you the method that I like and I prefer. So you put it down, and I usually put it around, if this is a clock, we have it like 4 o'clock, have at least half of the wooden tool on the bat as you slide, and then you just start creeping it in the bottom and removing clay as it develops on the edge. And the amount of cutting you do, the amount of pushing you push this into the middle, is basically how much clay you can play with for your wall. And I would say at least half an inch to an inch worth of rim, mostly just so you can get your finger underneath there. Okay, so I'm almost there. Just removing a little extra clay. So I'm gonna go a little more. Right there looks good. And now I need to sneak a sponge underneath there, and then my finger with it. So first thing is I sneak the sponge underneath, and then my finger is gonna start pushing that edge up. And it also cleans up the bottom, and then you basically lift this to the shape that you want. So if you wanted that modern style white plate that you saw at the beginning of the video, just lift this up all the way. If you wanted a slightly less angle, you flare a little bit. If you want it even wider, you just bring it back down. So the way I lift, I just put the sponge underneath, and I literally just turn my wrist towards the center like this, like I'm turning a doorknob. And then my outside hand, or my left hand, my inside hand is going to be applying light pressure on here just to support. So both are moving like that, like I'm turning 2 doorknobs with both hands, or like water faucets. So put it underneath, and then slowly start lifting. Okay, and that's basically it. That's more or less the easy way to make a plate. You compress, cut off the extra, slip a tool underneath the cut, and lift. And then you can play around at spirals, and you can create a little edge if you want, but that's pretty simple. Now I'm gonna go back and compress this back down, and I'm gonna show the other method that I prefer over the cutting. So I'm just gonna compress this down, get it flat again. And the reason why I prefer this method over the cutting is sometimes when you cut, it tends to remove more clay than you want if you're not steady with the cutting tool. In this case, the wooden knife as you cut, it might get messed up. So there's a lot of room for error. So my recommendation is when you do it. So you basically do the same steps, compress down, cut the edge, round the outside. But instead of cutting underneath, you actually take your sponge, and at 3 o'clock, you're applying downwards pressure, and you're pushing both hands inward towards the center, and that causes the clay to start rising. So something like this. So I drape the clay over the edge. My middle finger, my right hand is going to apply pressure towards the 3 o'clock. And then my left hand is just applying light pressure here so that the clay is basically rising here versus anywhere else. And the reason why I like this is because you're actually pushing the clay to center, and that helps realign the particles, make sure your rim stays nice and centered. And you can apply downwards pressure as you do this as well to really make sure that that rim stays compact. And just by doing that, you have a thicker rim to work with. And then from here, you basically play around with it the same way. You can pull it, you can flare it, you can put it more angled, and basically whatever style you want. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna play around with this a little more. I'm gonna push this in a little more to make this a little higher. So now my left hand is applying light pressure on the inside as a guide to make sure that the clay doesn't thicken up over here. So it's only thicken up over here. And then I'm just gonna do a very gentle pull upwards. Do a light compression, right? And now I'm ready to flare. So a few things before you flare. If you notice that your rim is not level, you're gonna wanna cut that. And one thing, when I flare it out, if I have it set up like a vertical like this, I push my finger underneath right here at the base, and I flare out the same time. That allows the clay that's trapped here to go up, and that gives me more clay to work with, because you normally would trim that away during the trimming stage. So I push in with my right finger, you can see that undercut developing, and then my right hand, I'm then gonna start flaring out, and then I'm actually lightly compressing the two together. So it looks like this without the clay. So push in with the sponge, this hand goes here, and then I lift up, and then I tilt both hands out. And right there, I have my plate. And this is the more contemporary style that you see at most restaurants. And let's take it a step further, and let's add a little flair to it so it's not so boring. So I'm gonna get a rib, and I'm gonna add a little bit of a inside. So to make sure that this doesn't crack, I'm gonna do a few more compressions. So I'm gonna take my rib, and I'm just gonna be applying light downwards pressure right here. And because the rib is actually perfectly lengthwise to this size, I'm just gonna apply downwards pressure. And the benefit of doing this is if you wanted to see a indent here to create a separation between the base and the wall, this is a perfect way to do it. So you focus light pressure on the outermost corner of the tool, in this case my right side of the tool, and that creates this little edge. So if you wanted to do that, you could add a little separation, and then you can really emphasize it by going back and then just lightly pushing down. Not too much because you don't want to create a trench. And then you just push that into the clay wall. And that allows you a little more separation, so if you wanted to really glaze this or you put designs, that kind of frames your center. And let's say I wanted to add a spiral. I take my finger, you can apply light pressure, and then you just push that out. And then I can just lightly fade out the pressure, and then it stops. So right there, I have my beginner way to make a plate. Got an edge, put a spiral, got my flare, and now I'm going to create a little groove at the base. And then when I wire off, I'm going to gently, slowly spin the wheel and wire at the same time. Okay. So slowly spin the wheel and then wire. The reason why I want to spin and wire is because it's such a wide bottom. Sometimes when you wire it off when the wheel's not spinning, it can hurt your fingers. All right, there we go. And then lastly, touch up the plastic. And then I have my first plate. And this one is about a little under 8 inches in the wet. It'll probably shrink to closer to 7 1/4 when it's finished and done. And extra slip I can wipe away later. I hope you enjoyed episode 1 on how to make a plate. In episode 2, we'll cover the intermediate and advanced methods, and maybe even cover how to make a wide base platter.
Like and subscribe for more videos coming soon. Thank you.